There's a state in America that just offered voluntary buyouts to 200 of its own state employees because oil prices dropped enough to spook the next budget cycle. The state went for Trump in 2024 by 35 points. The state isn't a coastal blue state with a downtown vacancy problem. It's North Dakota, and it's one of 10 red states quietly falling apart while the political conversation pretends the South and the Plains are winning. Across America, while the headlines are dominated by California's wildfires and New York's exits, dozens of red states are absorbing structural decline that almost nobody is talking about. Rural hospitals closing at the highest rate in American history, coal industries collapsing from Wyoming to West Virginia, brain drain hollowing out the Midwest one graduating class at a time, oil revenues swinging 50% in a year because the global market doesn't care about state budgets, working-age men dying decades earlier than they should because of opioids, alcohol, and the economic collapse that hollowed out their towns. In this countdown, we're exposing the 10 red states quietly falling apart in 2026. Not the cliché version where red states are uniformly winning the migration wars. The real version. The version where 7 of the top 10 states for rural hospital closure risk are red. Where life expectancy in red rural America is now 5 to 7 years shorter than in urban blue America. Where state economies built on coal, oil, gas, and manufacturing are absorbing the slow death of all 4 at the same time. According to the Center for Healthcare Quality and Payment Reform, more than 700 rural hospitals across America are at risk of closing. According to USC Schaefer's 2025 analysis, the rural-urban life expectancy gap has widened to historic levels, driven by what researchers now call diseases of despair. According to Pew, 4 of the 4 most fiscally volatile states in America, Alaska, North Dakota, New Mexico, Wyoming, are commodity-dependent economies running on revenue streams the global market keeps repricing without warning. One state on this list lost 13% of its preschool population in a decade. Another has the highest rural hospital closure risk rate in the country. A third just announced its largest job loss month in professional services in 5 years. Think about it. Red states are supposed to be winning. The political branding says low taxes, free markets, growth, prosperity. The data says some of them are quietly absorbing structural collapse on a 30-year timeline that nobody campaigns on. Subscribe before your state's nearest hospital closes. Like the video if you've ever driven through a small town in Middle America and wondered when the last new business opened there. Now you'll know. Let's break it down. Number 10, Indiana, where the manufacturing belt rusted, the basketball hoops stayed up, and the young people kept leaving anyway. There's a state in the Midwest where rural high school graduations are still the biggest event of the year, and the same students never come back after college. Welcome to Indiana. Indiana sells itself as the dependable Midwestern alternative. Cheaper than Illinois, more business-friendly than Michigan, lower taxes than the coasts, manufacturing legacy, the home of basketball, corn, and steady, no-drama governance, and underneath, a slow demographic squeeze that nobody outside southern Indiana really tracks. The numbers. Indiana has been flagged in multiple national studies for chronic brain drain, with rural high school graduates leaving for Bloomington, Indianapolis, Evansville, or out of state, and most never coming back. Indiana's overall population growth has lagged the national average for decades, with the state ranking among those with the smallest urban-rural gap and the deepest rural decline. Indiana's median household income sits around $69,000, well below the national median of about $77,000. Rural Indiana has been hit hard by the same forces hitting the rest of the Rust Belt-adjacent Midwest, with school consolidations, hospital closures, and Main Street decline accelerating since 2010. Indiana voted for Trump in 2024 by 19 points, with rural counties showing some of the strongest support and the most acute structural decline. Reddit quote, Indiana's small towns have been shrinking my entire life, and the politicians who win on small town values never seem to fix it. What it's like. Living in rural Indiana is like dating someone who shows up to family dinner with the same story every year about how the town used to have a movie theater. Picture this. You graduate from a small-town high school in southern Indiana in May 2026. There are 87 students in your class. 73 of them are leaving the county for college, military, or work. Maybe 20 will come back permanently. The town's tax base depends on those 20. The school depends on those 20. The volunteer fire department depends on those 20. The math hasn't worked since 1995, and nobody in the state legislature has a 30-year plan to fix it. Where it gets uncomfortable, Indiana's leadership has prioritized state-level tax cuts and business attraction, and Indianapolis and a handful of suburbs have done well. The rest of the state has been quietly aging in place, with the structural decline absorbed by school consolidations, hospital service cuts, and slow disinvestment. Sharp contrast. Indiana and Ohio share borders and similar industrial pasts. Ohio just flipped to net positive domestic migration for the first time in over a decade. Indiana's rural decline has continued. Same Rust Belt, different migration math. Indiana isn't failing dramatically. It's failing the way a town fails when every graduating class leaves, and the people staying behind keep doing the math and finding the same answer. Number 9. Iowa, where the corn keeps growing and the economy stops growing whenever you measure it carefully. There's a state in the heartland where the professional and business services sector lost 2,000 jobs in a single quarter of 2025, where the brain drain ranks among the worst in the country, and where the political messaging insists everything is fine. Welcome to Iowa. Iowa is a state that benefits enormously from being underestimated. Quiet economy, strong agriculture, reasonable cost of living, major employers like Principal, John Deere, and Casey's General Stores. And underneath, an aging demographic squeeze, a brain drain that exceeds its neighbors, and a political class that has spent the last 10 years cutting taxes faster than revenues can follow. The numbers. Iowa lost roughly 2,000 jobs in professional and business services in early 2025, contributing to a cumulative non-farm job decline of about 500 jobs through the early part of the year. Iowa's brain drain ratio, the gap between college graduates produced and college graduates retained, is worse than all 6 of its border states. Roughly half of University of Iowa graduates surveyed in recent years stay in the state after graduation, compared to roughly 75% of University of Minnesota graduates. Iowa voted for Trump in 2024 by 13 points, after voting for Obama twice in 2008 and 2012, marking one of the steepest red shifts in the country. Iowa's rural counties continue to lose population, while Metro Des Moines and Metro Iowa City absorb most growth. Reddit, quote, "Iowa is fine if you don't care about new jobs or young people. Both are decreasing. What it's like. Living in rural Iowa is like dating someone who's been a perfectly nice person for 30 years and is now slowly getting more boring every month." Picture this. You're a young engineer who graduated from Iowa State in 2025. You have 3 job offers. One is in Des Moines, Iowa, or $68,000. One is in Minneapolis for $84,000. One is in Austin for $92,000. You took the Minneapolis job. You're not the first one to take the Minneapolis job. Your high school class had 23 graduates, and 19 of them did the same math. Your hometown is now 8% smaller than it was in 2010. Where it gets uncomfortable, Iowa's economy is still heavily tied to agriculture and food processing, sectors that have been consolidating for 50 years. The professional and tech services that drive growth elsewhere have struggled to scale outside Des Moines. The state's tax-cutting strategy has reduced revenue volatility but hasn't reversed the demographic squeeze. Sharp contrast. Iowa and Minnesota are direct neighbors. Minnesota retains its college graduates, attracts net domestic migration, and ranks in the top tier on most quality of life and economic indicators. Iowa does not. Same plains, very different demographic outcomes. Iowa isn't failing because corn isn't profitable. It's failing because the rest of the economy hasn't grown to replace what corn alone can no longer carry. Number 8. Missouri, where the Show Me State shows you a different state every 50 miles, and most of them are losing population. There's a state where rural hospitals are closing at one of the highest rates in the country, where St. Louis has been declining for 70 years, and where the political conversation is dominated by everything except the structural decline. Welcome to Missouri. Missouri is the state that used to be a bellwether. For most of the 20th century, Missouri picked the winner of every presidential election except one. The state that was once a perfect average of America has now become an outlier in a different direction. Rural decline, urban depopulation, brain drain, and a fiscal structure that hasn't reset for 21st century reality. The numbers. Missouri has 29 rural hospitals at risk of closure, with 12 at immediate risk in the next 2 to 3 years, according to Becker's Hospital Review's 2025 analysis. That's roughly 50% of the state's rural hospit. St. Louis City population has dropped from a peak of 856,000 in 1950 to roughly 280,000 in 2025, one of the steepest urban population declines in American history. Missouri's brain drain has been documented in multiple analyses, with Kansas City and St. Louis losing more college graduates than they retain, especially in tech and professional services. Missouri voted for Trump in 2024 by 18 points, with rural counties showing the strongest red support and the steepest population declines. Reddit quote, Missouri's leadership keeps celebrating wins while every county outside Kansas City and St. Louis loses population. What it's like. Living in rural Missouri is like dating someone whose family used to throw great parties in 1985 and is now mostly arguing about who gets the porch swing in the inheritance. Picture this. You drive Highway 36 from Hannibal to St. Joseph in October. The towns you pass through, Macon, Brookfield, Chillicothe, Cameron, are smaller than they were when you were a kid. The Walmart on the edge of town is the largest employer in 4 of those 5 counties. The high school football teams have shrunk so much that 8-man football has become the norm in entire regions of the state. The hospital in Brookfield is on the closure risk list. The next nearest one is 45 minutes away. Where it gets uncomfortable, Missouri's structural decline is multifaceted. The state's 2 large metros, St. Louis and Kansas City, have stabilized but not reversed long-term population trends. The rural counties continue to lose population. The state's tax structure has been incrementally cut, narrowing revenue without offsetting growth, and the rural healthcare collapse is accelerating faster than the state legislature is responding. Sharp contrast, Missouri and Iowa share similar demographic pressures. Iowa's rural decline is more concentrated. Missouri's rural decline is more widespread. Same Midwest erosion, different geographic spread. Missouri isn't failing because the state is uniquely cursed. It's failing because the state is large, the rural counties are deep, and the political class has spent 30 years debating culture instead of confronting the slow demographic squeeze that hits every single non-metro corner of the state. Hey, before we get into the rest of the list, the states we're about to cover are the ones where structural decline isn't a forecast, it's the current reality. States where rural health care is collapsing in real time, where life expectancy is dropping, and where the political conversation hasn't caught up to the math. If this list has been useful, hit subscribe, because the next one we're working on is 10 red counties quietly going bankrupt, and you'll want to see who made it. Like the video if you've watched a small town in Middle America change in ways nobody campaigned on. Drop a comment if you're from one of these 10 states and tell me what the official narrative gets wrong. Real conversations happen in the comments, and I read them. Now, let's keep going. Number 7. North Dakota, where the oil money paid the bills, and now the oil price is making the bills nervous. There's a state with the largest taxpayer surplus in America, on paper, and a state government that just offered voluntary buyouts to 200 employees because oil price volatility could swallow the next biennium. Welcome to North Dakota. North Dakota is the state that confuses the fiscal narrative. On Truth in Accounting's 2025 Financial State of the States, North Dakota ranks first in the country with a $63,300 per taxpayer surplus. On the ground, the state is staring at oil price uncertainty, agricultural commodity volatility, and demographic squeeze in rural counties that have never recovered from previous boom-bust cycles. The numbers. North Dakota's general fund revenue forecast for the 2025-2027 biennium was revised down by $105 million in March 2025, driven primarily by oil price softness. The state offered voluntary retirement buyouts to 200 state employees in early 2025, with 19 state agencies participating, the largest such program since 2018. North Dakota is one of the 4 most fiscally volatile states in America, alongside Alaska, New Mexico, and Wyoming, all dependent on commodity-driven severance tax revenue. North Dakota's permanent oil and mineral trust funds have helped buffer the state, but rural counties outside the Bakken oil patch continue to lose population. North Dakota voted for Trump in 2024 by 35 points, the strongest red state in America by margin. Reddit quote, "North Dakota's surplus is real. The reason for the surplus is not stable. What it's like. Living in rural North Dakota is like dating someone who hit it big at the casino in 2014 and has been trying to budget ever since. Picture this, you're a state employee in Bismarck reading the email about voluntary retirement incentives. The email is polite, the math is clear. The state is preparing for revenue uncertainty. You're 58. The buyout looks good. You take it. 200 of your colleagues are doing the same thing this month. The state is shedding institutional knowledge to prepare for a budget cycle that hasn't started yet. Where it gets uncomfortable, North Dakota's economy is structurally tied to commodities the state can't control. Oil prices, wheat prices, corn prices. When all three are healthy, the state runs surpluses that look like fiscal genius. When any two of three weaken, the math gets ugly fast. Sharp contrast, North Dakota and South Dakota share a name and very different fiscal structures. South Dakota relies more on sales tax and tourism. North Dakota relies more on severance tax. Same plains, very different revenue volatility. North Dakota isn't failing because the oil is gone. It's failing because the oil dictates the budget and the oil is volatile. And the rural counties beyond the oil patch are absorbing decline that the surplus can't reverse. Number 6. Wyoming, where the cowboy state lost a fifth of its preschoolers and the coal kept dying anyway. There's a state where the population of preschool-aged children dropped roughly 20% between the 2010 and 2020 censuses, where the coal industry has been in structural decline for 15 years, and where the state's leadership keeps insisting the next boom is just around the corner. Welcome to Wyoming. Wyoming has one of the strongest fiscal positions in America, second place to North Dakota in TIA's 2025 surplus rankings, with a $27,200 per taxpayer surplus, and underneath that surplus, a demographic squeeze that's quietly hollowing out the state's future workforce. The numbers. Wyoming lost roughly 20% of its preschool-aged population, ages 0 to 4, between the 2010 and 2020 censuses, one of the steepest age-specific declines of any state. The state's coal industry has continued its long-term decline, with employment in mining and extraction support services dropping significantly since 2014. Wyoming's high school enrollment is projected to decline 5.6% by 2031, according to the National Center for Educational Statistics. The state's economy is among the four most fiscally volatile in America due to severance tax dependence on coal, oil, gas, and trona. Wyoming voted for Trump in 2024 by 46 points, the largest margin of any state. Reddit quote, "Wyoming brags about its surplus while losing every single demographic that creates a future. What it's like. Living in rural Wyoming is like dating someone who has a great trust fund and is also slowly running out of friends." Picture this. You're a teacher in a small Wyoming town in fall 2026. Your kindergarten class has 11 students, down from 18 a decade ago. The high school enrollment is projected to drop another 6% by 2031. The school district is debating consolidation again. Your husband works for a coal company. The coal company has been shrinking for 12 years. You both make decent money on paper, but you both know the math is going one direction, and the state's surplus doesn't fund your kids' college, your retirement, or the future you're trying to build. Where it gets uncomfortable, Wyoming's surplus is real but not durable in demographic terms. The state has built sovereign wealth-style reserves through its permanent mineral trust fund, which is genuine fiscal stewardship. But fiscal reserves don't replace 20% of the preschool population, and they don't reverse the coal industry's structural decline. Sharp contrast. Wyoming and Idaho are both Mountain West states with similar geographic footprints. Idaho is growing rapidly, with population gains across most age cohorts. Wyoming is shrinking in every age group below 45. Same mountains, very different demographic momentum. Wyoming isn't failing fiscally, it's failing demographically, the way a state fails when the children stop arriving and the surplus is no longer connected to a future tax base. Number 5. Louisiana, where the Cajun culture stays warm. and the demographic math stays cold. There's a state where 27 rural hospitals are at risk of closing, where 9 are at immediate risk, where the population has been declining for 4 straight years, and where the political branding insists Louisiana is on the rise. Welcome to Louisiana. Louisiana is the red state with one of the most acute structural declines in America that's also the hardest to write about, because Louisiana culture is genuinely unique, the food is genuinely incredible, and the people are genuinely lovely, and the state is genuinely losing residents at one of the fastest rates in the country. The numbers. Louisiana has 27 rural hospitals at risk of closing, with 9 at immediate risk in the next 2 to 3 years, per Becker's January 2026 analysis. That's roughly 48% of the state's rural hospitals. Louisiana's population has declined for 4 consecutive years, losing tens of thousands of residents annually to domestic outmigration. Louisiana ranks among the bottom 5 states for life expectancy, with rates affected by violent crime, maternal mortality, and chronic disease. Louisiana voted for Trump in 2024 by 22 points, with the Acadiana and northern parishes showing both the strongest red support and the steepest decline. The state's home insurance market has been disrupted by repeated hurricanes, with multiple major insurers exiting the state since 2020. Reddit quote, "Louisiana is the state that breaks your heart because you love it, and watching it shrink is unbearable. What it's like. Living in rural Louisiana is like dating someone who's beautiful, charming, and trapped in a 30-year cycle of disasters they didn't cause. Picture this. You're a young couple in Lafayette in 2026. You both work. You both want to stay. The hurricane insurance on your modest home has tripled in 5 years. The nearest hospital just announced it's converting to emergency-only services. Your friends keep texting from Houston, Nashville, Atlanta, Dallas, asking if you've thought about it. You have thought about it. You don't want to think about it. Eventually, you do the math. Where it gets uncomfortable, Louisiana's structural decline is the result of multiple forces compounding: climate-driven insurance crisis, chronic underinvestment in education and healthcare, crime concentrated in New Orleans but rippling statewide, coastal erosion that's literally redrawing the state's geography, and political leadership that has spent decades responding rather than reforming. Sharp contrast. Louisiana and Mississippi are direct neighbors with similar demographic pressures. Both are losing population, but Louisiana's rate of decline has been faster. Same Gulf, slightly different math. Louisiana isn't failing because Louisianans don't love their state. It's failing because loving Louisiana has become an increasingly expensive emotional commitment, and the people doing the math are no longer arguing with the answer. Number 4. Mississippi, where the poverty rate hasn't moved much since 1985, and the rural hospitals keep moving toward closure. There's a state with 36 rural hospitals at risk of closing, 23 at immediate risk, the highest absolute count of immediate risk closures in the country, and a state government that has continued to refuse Medicaid expansion through 2026. Welcome to Mississippi. Mississippi is the state that has been at the bottom of so many rankings for so long that Mississippi at the bottom has stopped being news. Median income, last in the country. Senior poverty, top 5. Healthcare access, last or near last. Education outcomes, bottom 5. And the rural hospital crisis is now hitting acceleration. The numbers. Mississippi has 36 rural hospitals at risk of closing, with 23 at immediate risk in the next 2 to 3 years, per Becker's December 2025 analysis. That's the highest absolute count of immediate risk rural hospital closures of any state in the country. Mississippi's median household income sits around $54,000, the lowest in the United States. The state's life expectancy ranks among the lowest 5 in the country. Mississippi has not expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, despite repeated legislative debates contributing to rural hospital financial instability. Mississippi voted for Trump in 2024 by 22 points. Reddit quote, "Mississippi has been losing for 50 years, and the political solution keeps being, wait, what it's like. Living in rural Mississippi is like dating someone whose family has been in a slow decline for 4 generations and who genuinely doesn't believe a different outcome is possible. Picture this. You're a small-town doctor in the Mississippi Delta. Your hospital received a fiscal stress designation in late 2025. 3 nearby hospitals have already closed. You're seeing patients who drove 90 minutes to see you because the only closer option is a federally qualified community clinic that's also overstretched. You're 47. You're tired. Your kids are looking at colleges in other states. You don't know if you'll still be in the state in 10 years. Where it gets uncomfortable, Mississippi's structural problems are multi-generational. The state's leadership has prioritized low taxes, minimal regulation, and resistance to federal program expansion. Each of those decisions has had downstream consequences for rural healthcare, education funding, and economic mobility. And the math has been ugly for so long that the urgency has faded into background noise. Sharp contrast. Mississippi and Arkansas are neighboring Delta region states with similar demographics. Arkansas adopted a partial Medicaid expansion that has helped stabilize some rural hospitals. Mississippi has not. Same Delta, slightly different healthcare floor. Mississippi isn't failing because Mississippians don't work hard. It's failing because the structural conditions have been left in place for so long that "this is just how it is" has become the de facto policy of the state. Number 3. Alabama. Where the football is still loud and the rural hospitals are getting quieter. There's a state where 28 rural hospitals are at risk of closing, where 22 are at immediate risk, where life expectancy ranks among the bottom 5 in the country, and where the state has refused Medicaid expansion through 2026. Welcome to Alabama. Alabama is the Sun Belt's most quietly distressed state. The brand is SEC football, beach access on the Gulf, low taxes, friendly people, and Sunday barbecue. Underneath, a senior healthcare crisis, a rural hospital collapse, and a near-monopoly insurance market that distorts hospital reimbursement statewide. The numbers. Alabama has 28 rural hospitals at risk of closing, with 22 at immediate risk in the next 2 to 3 years, per Becker's December 2025 analysis. That's 58% of the state's rural hospitals. Alabama state life expectancy sits around 73.2 years, among the 5 lowest in the nation. Alabama is one of 10 states that have not expanded Medicaid under the ACA, contributing to rural hospital financial instability. One private insurer, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama, controls roughly 94% of the large group private insurance market, distorting reimbursement statewide. Alabama voted for Trump in 2024 by 30 points. Reddit quote, "Alabama loves its football and quietly buries its rural communities." What it's like. Living in rural Alabama is like dating someone who's deeply religious, deeply hospitable, and deeply uninterested in confronting their own family's slow decline. Picture this. You're a paramedic in rural West Alabama in 2026. The county hospital ended inpatient services last year. The next closest hospital is 60 miles away. Your average transport time has tripled. You've watched cardiac patients die in the back of the ambulance because the cath lab is too far. You took a second job at a delivery service to make ends meet. You're considering moving to Tennessee or Georgia, where your skills are paid better and the hospitals haven't all closed. Where it gets uncomfortable, Alabama's structural decline is the result of policy choices stacked on top of demographic pressure. The Medicaid non-expansion alone has been estimated to cost the state's rural hospital system hundreds of millions of dollars in foregone revenue. The insurance market concentration distorts pricing. The state's tax structure has been chronically light on revenue, and the rural healthcare system has been the first to absorb the cuts. Sharp contrast. Alabama and Louisiana are neighboring Gulf states. Louisiana expanded Medicaid in 2016 and stabilized some rural hospital finances. Alabama did not. Same humidity, very different odds of getting the ambulance to arrive in time. Alabama isn't failing because the state isn't friendly. It's failing because the structural choices made by the state legislature for the past 30 years have produced a healthcare system that the rural population can no longer rely on. Number 2. Arkansas. Where the Walmart is open, the hospitals are not, and the math has been the worst in the country. There's a state where 30 rural hospitals are at risk of closing, where 12 are at immediate risk, and where the rural hospital closure risk rate of 64% is the highest in America. Welcome to Arkansas. Arkansas is the small southern state that has built its modern brand on cheap real estate, low taxes, fishing, and a quiet pace of life. Underneath, the most acute rural hospital crisis in the country, a chronic poverty squeeze, and a structural underinvestment in education and infrastructure that has stretched across multiple decades. The numbers. Arkansas has 30 rural hospitals at risk of closing, with 12 at immediate risk in the next 2 to 3 years, per Becker's December 2025 analysis. That's roughly 64% of the state's rural hospitals, the highest percentage in America. Arkansas median household income sits around $56,000, among the lowest in the country. The state has one of the lowest life expectancies in the nation, with male life expectancy around 73 years. Arkansas's partial Medicaid expansion, the private option or Air Home program, has helped, but rural hospital finances have continued to deteriorate. Arkansas voted for Trump in 2024 by 27 points. Reddit, quote, "Arkansas is what happens when low taxes meet rural reality, and rural reality wins. What it's like. Living in rural Arkansas is like dating someone who keeps insisting they're saving money by skipping the doctor's appointments." Picture this. You're a 60-year-old farmer in southwest Arkansas in spring 2026. You've had chest discomfort for 2 months. You haven't gone to the doctor because the cardiologist is 75 minutes away, and you don't want to drive that far. The hospital that used to be 15 minutes from your farm closed in 2023. Your wife asks you every week to schedule the appointment. You keep saying you will. The math you're doing isn't financial, it's psychological. Going to the doctor 75 minutes away is admitting that your community has shrunk to the point where the basic services aren't there anymore. Where it gets uncomfortable, Arkansas's rural hospital crisis is the worst in the country in percentage terms. The state's leadership has chosen the Southern low-tax narrative over structural rural healthcare reform. The federal program partial expansion has helped at the margins, but the math has gotten worse, not better, year over year. Sharp contrast, Arkansas and Missouri are neighboring states with similar rural profiles. Missouri's rural hospital risk rate is around 50%. Arkansas's is 64%. Same Ozarks, very different healthcare cliff. Arkansas isn't failing because the people don't matter. It's failing because the state has prioritized cheap living over the medical infrastructure that cheap living was supposed to be paired with, and the math doesn't fit on a campaign poster. Number 1. West Virginia. The state where the mountains are older than America, the economy never recovered from coal, and the deaths of despair keep counting. There's a state where life expectancy is 5 to 7 years shorter than in the urban Northeast, where the population has been declining for over a decade, where the opioid crisis has hit harder than any other state in the country per capita, and where the political conversation continues to revolve around an industry that hasn't been the answer in 25 years. Welcome to West Virginia. West Virginia is the most consistently quietly collapsing state in America. Population peaked in 1950 and has been declining ever since. Coal employment peaked in the 1940s and has dropped roughly 90% since. The state ranks at or near the bottom on virtually every economic, health, and demographic indicator. And the political branding has been about restoration of an industry that's not coming back. The numbers. West Virginia's population has declined every decade since 1950, with continued losses through 2025. The state has the lowest labor force participation rate in the country, around 54%, meaning roughly half of working-age West Virginians are not in the labor force. West Virginia has had one of the highest opioid overdose death rates in the country for over a decade. The state's life expectancy sits around 74 years, well below the national average of 78.4, and rural life expectancy is dramatically lower than urban. The state's median household income hovers near $63,000, among the lowest in the country. West Virginia voted for Trump in 2024 by 42 points, the second largest margin in America after Wyoming. Reddit, quote, "West Virginia is the state where the politics keep promising the past and the present keeps shrinking anyway. What it's like. Living in rural West Virginia is like dating someone who survived 4 different addictions and is still living in the same neighborhood with the same triggers. Picture this. You're a third-generation West Virginian in southern West Virginia. Your grandfather worked in the mines. Your father worked in the mines. You don't. The mines that were here when you were a kid are mostly closed now. The town is half the size it was when you graduated high school in 1998. Your county's drug overdose rate has been a national headline for 15 years. You've buried 3 friends from your graduating class. Politicians come through every 4 years promising to bring back coal. Coal hasn't been the answer for 25 years. Where it gets uncomfortable, West Virginia's structural decline isn't a recent crisis. It's the cumulative result of an economy built on a single industry that's been dying for 70 years, of a federal and state response that has been more reactive than proactive, and of a political conversation that has rewarded promises about restoration over honest reckoning with what comes next. Sharp contrast. West Virginia and Virginia share a long border and similar Appalachian geography in some counties. Virginia ranks in the top 15 for fiscal health, has a growing economy, and a stable demographic future. West Virginia ranks at the bottom on most measures. Same Appalachia, very different policy decisions over 50 years. West Virginia isn't failing because West Virginians don't love their state. It's failing because the state has spent 70 years building its political identity around an industry that the global economy stopped wanting, and nobody has put forward a credible plan for what the state actually becomes after coal. So there it is. 10 red states quietly falling apart, on the public record in audited reports. Almost nobody outside policy circles ever reads. States where the political branding insists everything is winning, and the demographic and economic data tells a different story. States where rural hospitals are closing at the highest rates in American history. States where the children are leaving and not coming back. States where the structural conditions, life expectancy, healthcare access, fiscal volatility, brain drain have been deteriorating for years while the political conversation rewards everything except confronting them. The red states topping the actual outcomes charts in 2026, places like Florida and Texas in absolute population growth, places like Tennessee in fiscal discipline, are not winning because of red politics alone. They're winning because they have specific economic engines, healthcare investment, infrastructure spending, and population dynamics that make them outliers, not the rule. The 10 states on this list represent the rest of the red coalition. The Plains, the Mountain West outside Idaho, the Rust Belt adjacent Midwest, and the Deep South. The states where low taxes and political branding have not, in fact, produced the prosperity the brand promises. The good news, you can know this. The Becker's Hospital Review Report is free. The Pew Charitable Trusts analysis is free. The Census Bureau migration data is free. You can read it. Most people don't. Most people trust the political narrative and stop reading. The reason these red states are quietly falling apart is because the falling apart is quiet. And it's quiet because the political conversation rewards the loud version of every other story. If this list helped, share it with the relative who keeps insisting their red state is winning. Hit subscribe, because next we're breaking down 10 red counties quietly going bankrupt. And you'll want to see if your county is on it. Drop a comment if you're from one of these 10 states and tell me what the official narrative gets wrong. And remember, the worst political crisis isn't the loud one. It's the one nobody is willing to put on a campaign poster.